First and foremost, you can't blame the system. Building a great business is by definition being an outlier. If you're going to do something that is truly unique, truly going to affect change in the world around you, the system is always stacked against the outlier. You have to take it on your shoulders to figure out how to get through, above, below, or around the barriers.
This is All Quiet on the Second Front, a podcast where boring conversations around defense tech and national security come to die. Join me, Tyler Sweat, and my Second Front comrades as we dismantle the mundane and cut through the bureaucratic BS to demystify the world of defense tech. But be warned, this is not a typical government podcast. Ready to get weird? All right, what's up, everybody? We've got a special episode for you today. Was fortunate enough to help participate in the launch of Schoolhouse with Bravo Victor VC, Joe Musselman, and the team. And they were gracious enough to allow us to sort of cross-post today. Fireside chat we had where we had Admiral McRaven, we had Matt Bigge, and we had Shyam Sankar from Palantir, Bigge from Crosslink. Really excited to share this. We spent a bunch of time talking about leadership, about different lessons, about perspective on the industry. It's a little bit longer of an episode than normal, but it's probably my favorite conversation I've been able to be a part of with a bunch of folks I've really come to admire and enjoy working with. So hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks for checking in. Cheers. Admiral McRaven, thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I think everybody knows the background, so we'll skip the intro there. Matt Bigge, Crosslink Capital, like really interesting background. Little anecdote is we both became second lieutenants at the same fantastic upstate New York installation. And
Cool.
then and then Shyam from Palantir, who I think reputation precedes you. I think the anecdote has been every time someone's told me, hey, what does success look like as a new sort of entrant into defense tech, changing what a market looks like. I've looked at you, Doug, and Alex, and been like, well, look what they're doing. We'll figure that out. So really honored to sort of be up here. Bunch of friends in the audience. So a hat tip to Joe and the team on pulling a tremendous group of folks together. I'm going to go in a couple different directions, but I want to start with how we sort of take the country forward, and not in a political way. We've got a room, we've got capital allocators, we've got technicians, we've got government leaders, we've got operators. And we started delving into the conversation around regulation and policy and FAR. And I think the three of you each bring a different perspective, but how do we start to move forward at a speed that starts to have a degree of synchronization with reality? You know, and I always say, technology is moving in minutes. The Pentagon is moving in years and sometimes decades. And then we're asking folks to think about policy and regulation who are still struggling to get off Microsoft Windows 98. So there's a little bit of like a synchronization issue there, but it's not a throwaway. It's not an excuse. So Shyam, I'll start with you. Given some of those challenges, how do we start to sort of unify focus and bring people forward so that we are meeting near peer threats or, asymmetric conflict, wherever it may lie?
So this is the most exciting time. As I've been doing Palantir for 18 years, I joined as the 13th employee. In the beginning, it was like howling into the wind. The IC had a front door. The DoD did not. You can't imagine. You all are here because of that. That has changed massively. I think the most interesting part of what's happening right now is that there is a cohort of highly committed founders. And that has been an important part of this country since its beginning. We call them our founding fathers. We understand intuitively, I say this as a non-founder, to be clear, that there is something special about founders. This is what has driven American prosperity. When Bob Noyce, I'll get to the software thing in a second here, but when Bob Noyce started Intel, while 96% of his business was selling integrated circuits to the DoD, he never let more than 4% of his R&D budget come from the government because he had a vision of where he was going to go with this. And I think you need that sort of, it's not financial, it's just crazy founder math to make this work. And I think we forget that after World War II, It was Jack Grumman, not Northrop Grumman. It was Glenn Martin. It was Howard Hughes. It was Henry Kaiser. We had a bolus of founders that built the arsenal of democracy. These were not employees. These were not nameless, faceless corporations. And in the wake of that, we had Chrysler building missiles with the missile division. We had General Mills, the cereal company, making inertial guidance systems in their mechanical division. We didn't have a defense industrial base. We had an American industrial base. And this is the first, that's why I'm so excited that we're on the precipice of getting that back again.
Matt, from sort of again, you've been on both sides, is sort of the corporate operator in the military, capital allocator now. How do you look at it?
Well, I agree with everything Shyam just said. And I think it's really important and incumbent upon the type of folks who are in this room to understand the history of innovation in the United States, whether it's in Menlo Park, California, or do your research, Menlo Park, New Jersey, because they both have really, really important, places in our technical history. But I'd say first and foremost, you can't blame the system. And building a great business is by definition being an outlier. If you're going to do something that is truly unique, truly elite, truly going to affect change in the world around you, you're never going to be able to leverage or just use the system. The system is always stacked against the outlier. So you have to take it on your shoulders to figure out how to get through, above, below, or around the barriers. And that gets to a lot of the leadership talk, the points that Admiral McRaven made earlier. And it also gets to just, having priorities and understanding that you need to figure that out. Now, I think the POM cycle is absurd. No two ways about that. Like, just small commercial, all MACOM should have their own IRAD budgets, but I don't think there are any policy people here, so that will fall on deaf ears. But anyway, don't blame the system, I think is sort of my key thing.
And then, sir, been outside large institution, inside all levels of command and leadership. How do we sort of pull everybody forward here?
Yeah, I'll double tap what was said. The United States has always had this sense of founders, a sense of an innovative culture. But what's changed, in the last 20, 30 years is the cost of capital and the availability of capital. And also the concept of venture capital is fairly new relative. Chrysler didn't have venture capital, Kellogg's didn't have venture capital, but now you have venture capital. And you have people that are willing to take a bet on folks out here. Well, that is what's really going to accelerate the innovation. So you go to other countries, you take a look at China. China has industrial policies that are pumping money in. And that'll work for a while. But if you're not incentivizing the inventors, then after a while, that industrial policy doesn't play out. It is the fact that there are people out here that are willing to put money to bet on people like you. That's what allows innovation to catch fire.
I love the notion of, hey, we've already got all the pieces we need. We've got to allow sort of conditions to be set to maybe light the match, to reignite a passion. Bringing that down from a macro into an organizational level. And as we talk about leadership and culture and organizational identity, right? The cultural artifacts. And I recognize I gave none of you heads up on these questions, so welcome. What would, if somebody said, hey, what's the one book you read in the last year that has really affected not just your perspective on something, but like the way you practice something? And I'll prime it and say, for me, it's a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. All right. Got some plants out there. It's completely disconnected from technology. It's completely disconnected from venture and from defense. And it's about sort of the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And it's, the lens that it's told is through fine dining. Absolutely transformed the way I run my company, how we think about communication, how we think about teams, all of that. It was an unexpected thing for me to have it be that impactful. So I'd be curious, and like, sir, we'll start with you. And
thanks.
Reverse order. You made eye contact. That's your fault.
Interestingly, I mean, I don't read a lot of technology books, because I kind of get immersed in it day in, day out. But a book it's an older book, but it's one that I recommend a lot of times to my students is Stephen Covey's The Speed of Trust. And the reason I like The Speed of Trust is because, I mean, in this case, it talks about how trust is a real commodity in a business. But he mentions two things. He says, look, one, to have trust, you have to have a relationship with somebody. So he says, okay, you trust your brother-in-law. He's good to your sister, et cetera, et cetera. But if he doesn't deliver on his promises, if you loan him the lawnmower and he doesn't bring the lawnmower back, then after a while you don't trust him. And I think these two things apply to whatever business you have. You can I talk about being a person of integrity, yeah, but you got to deliver on your promise, right? Or after a while, then people don't trust you anymore. They may still think you're a good dude, but they won't trust you with their money. They won't trust you with their people. So you have to be able to deliver. And I think the hard part sometimes for, companies, startups is they've got a great idea and they've got a great vision and they swing for the fence and they miss. And they miss again. Now there's some value in swinging for the fence, but sometimes it's the little steps where you say, okay, you're going to invest in me. This is the threshold I'm going to hit. And I'm going to hit that threshold. And then I'm going to hit this threshold. And then you begin to build up trust. And then guess what? It gets more money. It gets more capital. It gets, more and more. So I've always liked The Speed of Trust. It's a simple book, but I think it's got a lot to do with how you're going to be successful.
I mean, I'd say favorite book of the year that I have found very informative was probably Chip Wars. Just kind of a great reminder of how we got where we are. That said, something that I keep open on a browser tab on every device I own is the Serenity Prayer. And when I just think about going through life day to day, it allows me to stay focused on where I can make an impact as a leader. And if you just think about every situation you're in terms of where can I truly move the needle versus what is, admit it, most of what you do is wasted effort. You're burning calories for no good reason. And if you just think about where you can move the needle and focus on it, it's amazing what you and your team can accomplish.
I don't feel like I have a great answer to this one. I feel like
come on, we gave you two of us to talk for you.
Freedoms.
I gave you all this time.
I was working. I was turning it over in my head. I have gotten a lot of inspiration out of Freedom's Forge, not only because of the historical arc, but it just shows you and reminds you that hard things are hard, and that you're not going to fix the system, and that great people really do matter, and that you've got to build all of this stuff around talent, and that there is something uniquely American about getting all of this to work. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I think it sets a lot of what's happening in this room inside of a historical context and narrative, in terms of its primacy for winning. And that's really what I reflect on in terms of running the business. If people ask me like, well, how do you build high performance engineering teams that deliver velocity? And the answer is, I don't. I focus on the primacy of winning. I feel like so much, unfortunately, of what my young engineers have been taught, what I was taught, is just wrong. It's like you're taught how everyone wished the world would work instead of being just brutally honest about how it does work. I think that's one of the things in the long collaboration we've had with special operations is like, that is a community that understands how the world works. Every day they are facing the reality of it and cannot entertain the fantasy of how they wish the world worked. And at that brutal fault line is where all the learning really happens. And how do you get your organization there? How do you get people not to ask you about work-life balance? Choose life over balance. How do you get people on the X and on the things that matter, Is career growth about lifting, like the Incredible Hulk didn't become incredible because Bruce Banner lifted a little bit more weight every day. It wasn't progressive overload. Got thrown off the deep end, gamma radiation, almost died, really painful. That's how you make superheroes. So how do you grow your people to be exceptional? I think it's not by coddling them. And I think you got to get them on the X.
So we're going to go do a gamma session after this. It's a perfect
You're already
segue.
half green.
It's a perfect
Gamma or whiskey?
Both. It's relative. But it's a good segue into so we've been moving sort of down from like the national level, the organizational level. Now bring it down to the human level, right? And you got at it with some of the primitives and the principles there. The room all understands, right, the criticality of trust at a very, very foundational level, and like the magic that can be generated by a properly empowered and motivated small team. There are folks that are still in here. There are folks that are already out. There are folks that are building. There are folks that are funding. I think as things are moving faster and like what it means to be an organization are changing, social norms are changing. I find a lot of peers, and we're talking about how to continue to bring some of those real strong tenets that we grew up with, either, through sports or the military or whatever, and bring that in to the organization without sort of over engineering it one way or the other. Right. So finding that balance and then being very, very intentional with how you're building cultural norms and artifacts. And so, you talked about the, hey, I would repeat these tenets before every meeting. Right. You're talking about some of the philosophy on how you're going to let folks go into the deep end. But what have you guys seen? And we'll go Shyam down. One of the biggest challenges as you're sort of molding new entrants into a culture, and that culture is just changing every time you add somebody. And what's like a practical takeaway for someone in the audience who's building a team right now they should have in their back pocket?
I'll offer two things, one on building and then one on maintaining. The first thing is, for as long as you can, and ideally forever, treat your company like an artist colony and not a factory. These are unique individuals, and you want to build around their strengths. And they're going to win based on their superpowers. Trying to get them to go from mediocre to somewhat more mediocre is a waste. Leave that unmanaged. It's a waste of your time. And they're going to lose based on their kryptonite. There's nothing Superman could do about kryptonite other than avoiding it. You got to help them discover their own surface area and then unleash them. Like the rest will take care of itself. Now, in terms of maintaining, I'm going through this right now where it's like, what is the onboarding experience at Palantir? Somehow it's turned into like 3 weeks. And it's like, what? How, I remember it used to be like, show up, read the wiki, commit code. And it was like, all this would happen within your first 4 hours. And so there's just like Leviathan is real. And so I think one of the most important things as a founder, as a leader, is going and blowing some shit up every now and then, right? It's like, no, I'm like, this onboarding's done. Show up. I'm going to so you need to there's a dialectical between order and chaos. And sometimes you need to just burn it all down, start over again, earn it from first principles. Someone thought it was a good idea. Every time someone had a question, let's add it to onboarding. That's a disaster. What are you signaling to people, right? So just think about part of your job is there in the Hindu tradition, there's like 3 structures. There's the creator, the maintainer, and the destroyer. Don't forget the role of the destroyer.
Oh yeah, I love that. And I'll say, as someone who, when I joined Second Front, nobody knew I started for 3 weeks, so I just didn't get paid. They were like, "Oh, this is going to be great. When do you start?" And I was like, "Fucking 3 weeks ago. What are you talking about? My wife's going to kill me." So yeah, there's a balance between that onboarding process. It can't be where it was for me. It can't be where it is for you. So, Matt.
Yes, the way I think about leadership is, a lot of it is getting people to want to do what you need them to do. And that really, really gets into the whole team thing. And if you don't have a team-focused culture, it's really, really hard to get everybody rowing in the same direction. I'll just share one of the techniques that I used in my last business. Every Friday morning, I used to have an apartment up this street from my office, and just walking to the office every Friday morning, I'd stop and I'd get 10 $100 bills out of the ATM. And we had a bunch of young professionals in that office, and I'd go around and start off on one end and say, what is your key task for the month? How does it fit into your team's task for the quarter? And how does your team's task for the quarter fit into the company's goals for the year? And if they got it right, got $100. These are like 23-year-olds, many doing grad student stuff at night. $100 was a lot of money. But if they got it wrong, I go to the next person, and if they got it right, they get $200. And I'd do that until I ran out of money. Nobody ever got that wrong more than once. And it was amazing. I mean, it gets to the point you were making earlier about saying the same thing every day. That works, because when people have a lack of guidance, it gives them something to fall back on. And if your team is able to have a North Star without their supervisor or boss or whatever being around all the time, you're going to pick up productivity that you never knew existed. And for $1,000 a week, I bought retention, I bought corporate unity, I bought team building, and a lot of team building, because usually that money got spent around 6:00 on a Friday night, the bar in the basement of the building. But it's just an incredibly powerful tool.
Did you also own the bar and you were just getting that $1,000 right back? Just a quick launder?
No, I swear.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating here because two fundamentally different approaches. I mean, Shyam's looking at this, and of course, this is a software development. You're hiring the best computer scientists and coders in the world, and play to their unique skills and let them do the sorts of things that you're doing. But if you're going to build something, and you're going to build something large, you better have a process, and people better understand how to fit into that process. And so it was interesting. It was probably 2012. I took the leadership SOCOM and we went to Google, and we got out there to Google, and it was very interesting. They layered who we met. So we started off, we met with a bunch of the Googleites or whatever they are, and these were all Stanford kids. I mean, hair was all over here. They were brilliant, and they were coding, and they were doing what little Google guys do. And they were all in like T-shirts that said, "I'm in Google," or "I'm this," I'm that, shorts, flip-flops. I thought, okay, it's pretty interesting. Then we went to the next person that was kind of like their manager. And that guy was like in a black T-shirt and black jeans and, didn't have anything printed on the shirt. Went to the next person, and they were in a sport coat. We got up to the senior leaders, and they were in a suit. And I don't even think they knew this, but I knew what was happening here. I mean, you had to have adult structure somewhere in the organization. So you needed, seriously, you needed the brilliant young men and women to be doing the coding, to be eating pizza at 4:00 at night, to be on the whiteboard, to do all that. But at the end of the day, if you're going to turn that brain power into a functioning organization, you damn well better have some structure. And you better have figured out, how do you, Googleite, fit into the whole process that's going to make the company successful? So there is a marriage here somewhere that has to occur at some point in time. In a startup, you can go so far. But once that startup starts to scale, you better be prepared to scale and figure out, how do you keep the best of what you're doing with the young men and women that are brilliant, with a structure that you're going to need to, again, to scale up in a way that's going to be meaningful.
Well, and actually, I'll go back to days as a second lieutenant in the 10th Mountain Division. I mean, the inspiration for that $1,000 was commander's intent.
Yeah, of course.
And if people have the freedom to execute within
the commander's intent, right?
Boom.
Yeah.
So taking that on sort of philosophies of how we do the organization, I think at an individual level, sort of simple philosophy on leadership. I think one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten from a mentor was, hey, to your point on like when in command, he was like, hey, just underneath that veneer of like, you've got your shit together. He's like, there should be an 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, you should be violently committed to executing, resourcing the plan. 20% should be like purely heretical, like challenge everything. There are no sacred cows. Everything you've built is tear downable and replaceable and reconfigurable. The challenge is when you find goodness in that 20%, how do you then bring that into the 80% without, seemingly jostling an organization back and forth and back and forth and back and forth? So for you guys, is you look at yourselves and think about how you approach leadership, what is that one or two sort of tenets that you use sort of as like an anchor to guide just how you're going to prosecute all the different challenges of the day? And we'll start with Bigge, actually. We'll mix it up a little bit. Go in the middle here. You thought you were safe. I saw you.
So I guess, I'd refer to that as kind of being pragmatically dogmatic. And, when we're meeting with founders, a lot of the, founders that we work with are shockingly younger than me. And one of the really interesting things that you see after having been in the venture business for a while is you have a category of founders who blindly do what their investors tell them to do. That typically follows sort of a lemming path. It doesn't end well. Then you have people who ignore everything and are so dogmatic that they're going to do what they think is right, independent of all evidence to the contrary. But to me, the correct answer is pragmatically dogmatic. You have to have the courage in your convictions and execute with fury, with speed, with aggression, until facts present themselves that you're freaking wrong and you need to course correct. And hey, the world is a multivariate equation. You don't know when there's going to be a crosswind that requires you to shift the azimuth that you're moving on. And to me, the best leaders are the ones that understand how to tack when there's a crosswind, or, how to adjust course when the facts simply prove their, conviction wrong.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I tend to see the world dialectically, and there you have a dialectic between pragmatism and dogmatism. And maybe I'll answer to give a different spin on this and something a little bit more narrow and technical. I think you can kind of largely bucket engineers. This is a complete caricature intentionally into either being a hacker or an artist. And the hacker, their kind of joy in life comes out of solving a problem for the customer. Real problem, real world, so rewarding. But they probably build it in a completely unscalable. It may not even barely works the first time. It's how they built it is beside the point. They built the right thing. The artist, their joy in life comes out of building things beautifully. They're much more likely to polish rock. Whether it solves a problem or not for someone is completely besides the point. They build things the right way. If your company is only made up of one of these two things, you're going to fail. And as a consequence, all value comes from a managed tension. It to the point of tacking. Right? If these things are completely unmanaged and opposing forces, you go zero. Your velocity is zero. You're stuck. They have to. That's the managed. That's the job of the leader, is to really do that. I think this is what makes going from early stage R&D to production very hard. Everyone wants a process for what's in between there, but the problem is hackers and artists do not appreciate each other. They each feel like they did 80% of the work. Well, it turns out there's the first 80% and the second 80%. And I've probably transitioned 6, 7 really gnarly R&D things that mattered, and every single one of them was amongst the most painful experiences of my life. So I don't think there's a shortcut to doing that, and I don't think I'm doing it wrong. I think that's the nature of the thing. And as a leader, gearing up for that and understanding that these are good people who are highly skilled, a little bit to this artist colony bit, but that like managing this is how you create all the value.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both the panelists here, but for me, it was always about, what the problem is, and I was always a risk taker from the time I was a young officer. it was about taking risks, because everything I'd read about special operations was the unconventional nature of it, the risky aspect of it. But when I began to study special operations, a lot of them failed. And a lot of them failed because they hadn't done the planning necessary to reduce the risk to a manageable level. There was a sense that the bravado alone was going to, save the mission. Well, no, that's not true. When you're up against German guns or Japanese guns, that wasn't going to work in World War II. You had to outthink the enemy. You had to assume some risk. So part of this was recognizing, okay, we're going to take some risks, but we're going to plan as much of the risk out of it as we can. And then we will rely on the bravado and the talent of the individuals. So, I often talk about the bin Laden raid, and I said, look, we spent, 75% of our time planning the mission. Of course, that never makes it in the movie because nobody wants to see a bunch of SEALs up on whiteboards, planning missions. But you're never successful if you haven't figured out every aspect of the mission and planned the risk out of it. So, again, the business I was in was fundamentally about, here's your objective. How are we going to achieve that objective? You got to be unconventional, because guess what? The objective is figured out. Somebody's coming to take them down. Now you've got to figure out what is your asymmetric approach. That's going to be risky. How do you reduce the risk? And again, then you got to rely on your people.
So you sort of talk about, leadership frameworks and approaches, talk about, imparting opinionation on the risk we choose to accept, sort of flipping that on its head. How as leaders are you guys building in, for lack of a better term, an early warning system, an indicator that like, hey, I'm probably wrong here. And I've got to maybe do one more cycle of data collection, and then I've got to just pull cord and go in a different direction. I think it's something, we all talk about a lot of, hey, fail fast and, pivot when it's wrong. How do you know it's wrong? Or how do you know you've made a mistake before, there's been some like catastrophic outcome? And so we'll start with you.
Yeah, again, I don't think there's rocket science behind this, at least from my standpoint. It's, hey, you're going to build a plan, but you're going to have a bunch of people that are going to kind of help you think through this. So, if you're working it, you've got the person that is the helicopter expert, the parachute expert, the weapons expert, the demo expert. You're going to bring them all in, and they're going to help you create the plan. And then you're going to red team the plan. You always have to say, okay, we got the perfect plan. Okay, now who's the countervailing voice here that's going to say, yeah, but did you think about this? Ooh, no, we didn't think about that. Did you think? So, sometimes it's not just one person building the perfect plan. That's not what doesn't happen at Palantir. It doesn't happen anywhere. It's going to be a group effort. You're going to try to have the best plan you can. And then you need somebody that's the contrarian that comes in and says, I don't know about this. And you better be able to answer those questions, or you're going to find that you will fail spectacularly.
And I'd say you can't skip steps. And that absolutely gets to planning.
Yeah.
Like helicopter situation went
south.
That went south. Yeah. But apparently you guys had done some planning.
We had done some planning, yeah.
Good thing. But you can't skip steps. And to me, early warning signs, when I think about portfolio companies that I've worked with, one of the biggest is when they start throwing Hail Marys to make numbers. And start realizing, okay, this team has lost faith in their ability to just keep converting on down and distance. Yeah. Like as soon as you start seeing folks try to skip steps, throwing Hail Marys to achieve business objectives, you have something very fundamentally wrong, and you got to start rethinking a few things.
I think my much less polished, couth version of Admiral McRaven's, hey, part of your job is to tell me when you think I'm walking into a minefield, and if you don't, mine is at the end of the first AMA for employees, Ask Me Anything session, I make them all in unison tell me to F off to my face. And I'm trying to set the same sort of tenor that, like, I'm not important. You need to get into arguments with me. Like, if you see something going wrong, this is a place that we got to talk about that, and everyone's empowered to pull the sort of brake around this. And I think developing that sort of sensor apparatus where you're always in listening mode, where you're always going to take those objections very seriously, even if you're just going to run it down and prove to yourself, no, they're not right. They don't know this or that, but that you're going to do it seriously. And using that as a compounding learning opportunity for the entire org, I think creates a tremendous amount of confidence in what the plan is and an opportunity for everyone to grow.
You talk about, everybody's a sensor, and in the Toyota, everyone can stop the assembly line. I think a lot of us have come up with if you see a problem, you don't say something, you own the problem when it blows up. Sir, you talk about the importance of strong teams, of contrarian perspectives, creating space for that to take place. Flipping that around, I'm rereading the high growth startup right now. And a big tenet in the early section is scaling organizations and recognizing that some folks aren't going to scale with an organization. And whether we've seen this while we're in uniform or we've seen this out or you've seen portfolio companies, how are you guys looking at, the coaching, the mentoring, the performance management, but also that recognition that not everybody's going to be part of the journey from start to stop, and the organization might molt a few times, and that's okay. What's your approach to that? We'll go Shyam then down.
Well, I think this is where the metaphor of the artist calling has a lot of value. In most traditional organizations, you've coupled position and portfolio. So when someone, gets into a place where they're not going to grow with their portfolio, it inherently impacts their position and therefore their sense of self-worth, their sense of self-efficacy within the org. But, if you think about an artist, it's not like every single piece of art is monotonically improving in quality. It's there are periods, there are phases. We talk about these things. How do I communicate to this person that if you are true to who you are, if you can accept your weaknesses and your strengths, you're going to continue to have a portfolio that fits that your portfolio can change without impacting how important and what your position is. If you can't accept that, and that's honestly hard for lots of folks, then we might, this journey might be ending. We might not be in a place where this is going to keep working.
The number of true founders that have been a CEO that led a company to go public through the IPO and beyond. If you look at that as a percentage of companies that go public, that is a very, very low single digit number. So the vast majority of humans have the potential to be pretty good at a couple of things here and there. The ability to go from zero to long-term public company CEO, it's a false expectation to put on a founder. And, for me, if I'm going to make an investment in a company, well before I even give them a term sheet, we're going to have a conversation about, how do you see your role evolving over time? Understanding that there is a somewhere between 1% and 8% chance that you're still the CEO 10 years from now. And by the way, you probably don't want to be the CEO 10 years from now. So let's just get that out of the way early and often, have a candid conversation, use our words like adults so that there's no hidden agendas. Nobody's worried and looking behind their backs. Let's just accept it for what it is. Nobody stays in the same job typically for a decade, which is about how long it takes to build a proper public company. So that's, to me, it's just do you even want to do it?
Yeah, my situations were generally a little different. So, whether I was in command or whether I was a chancellor, a lot of times I had folks that were in senior leadership positions that weren't performing. And, sometimes people would say, well, you need to fire this guy or this gal. And I'd be like, maybe. But do they know exactly what I expect of them? And do I have a plan to make them better? So in a lot of cases, if they were not performing, and maybe more so when I was a chancellor, if they were not performing, I would sit down with them and say, look, you need to do this, 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 and this. Here's what I expect to see in the next 6 months. And then we're going to have a conversation in the next 6 months. And if you haven't achieved that, then your runway is getting real short. But I wanted to give them an opportunity to be successful because in a lot of cases, they didn't know what the expectations were. Back to your point, You got to have an adult conversation with them. You got to say, look, here's what I expect you to do. And if they don't meet those expectations, then it's a point in time, the journey's over and you got to move on. But I never just, when I saw poor performers, I didn't make the initial assessment that they were poor performers because they were just, not good at their job. Maybe they didn't understand exactly what the expectations were. And maybe I hadn't given them the resources and the tools to do the job correctly. Maybe they didn't have the right people around them. So, and in a lot of cases, when I was able to say, and all in writing, this is the plan to make you better. Here are the people, here are the resources. Now my expectation is in 6 to 9 months, you will achieve this. And if not, then we have another conversation.
Turning sort of the final corner here, and I think getting us on schedule. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. Want to end on sort of an optimistic note. So we'll go, sir, all the way back down. What are you most excited about over the next, 12 to 18? And I'll leave it unbounded.
Yeah, I'm excited, frankly, about the generation of young folks that I get a chance to spend time with. I've told people this many, many times before. I'm the biggest fan of the millennials and the Gen Z that you'll ever meet. And it's a different generation. But back to kind of the conversation we've been having. And, the very first question you asked was about, kind of how are we, what is the culture, how is this going to work? Well, understand, I'm a baby boomer. My parents were part of that greatest generation. My father was a fighter pilot in World War II. My mother was a East Texas school teacher. I grew up with those kind of post-World War II values, which were great values. But the expectation back then was that if your dad was in the military, you were going to be in the military. If your dad was a hardware owner, you were going to own a hardware store. A lawyer. Well, and that was generally true for most of the baby boomer generation. And then the next generation and the next generation came along, and the generation of the millennials and the Gen Zs and whoever the next generation, there are no constraints. This generation believes they can do anything. And that's great. And maybe they won't become CEOs, but they believe that they can invent something that's going to change the world. They have this great sense of entrepreneurship that is phenomenal. My generation didn't have that because nobody told us we could have that because we didn't understand how businesses worked. It was the Kellogg's and the General Electrics and it was the companies that were brick and mortar that had been, but it wasn't individuals. No individual was going to do that, but they did. And so when I see this generation of young folks, and again, I teach at the university and I spend a lot of time with them, this is a fabulous generation. And I will tell you, they are just as hardworking as their parents and grandparents. They're just as patriotic as their parents and grandparents. And so whenever I am worried about the direction of the country, I go into the classroom, spend time with these folks, I don't worry anymore because whatever happens, they're going to get us through it. They're going to figure out a way to cure cancer, to take care of all the divisiveness. A lot of this will be solved because of the great young folks that we have. So I'm always optimistic. Just spend a little time with these kids. Yeah.
No pressure, Matt, but if they don't clap for yours, it's a fucking bad answer.
Go team. Thank you. No, I really like and appreciate that answer. I have a 25-year-old son, and one of the things that I always find remarkable about being around him and his friends is this generation that has grown up as digital natives. It's almost, the sort of things that people my age, in their mid-50s were just kind of figuring out in their late 30s or 40s. These folks know about by the time they show up at college.
Yeah.
And so when you think about the acceleration, the geometric expansion of, technology, like they are so well suited to, just absolutely blow away, what for me was the difference between dialing a phone and, using this little supercomputer in my pocket. And I'm just excited about seeing where that goes. I think cancer is gone by the time, I think cancer's gone before I'm gone. And that's remarkable. You think about what's going on in, quantum compute, okay, but quantum networking. Quantum networking has the potential to really radically alter the way humans engage and really shrink the world in a really exciting and secure way. So I think there are some areas along those lines that can really fundamentally change the world around us. And if you're in your early mid-20s, like you've just, your entire demographic started on second base. And that's just super exciting.
You got a sympathy clap.
Yeah.
I think the simplest way to say it is I'm excited about American exceptionalism. You can, of course, look at what's happening with AI labs. Where is that really happening? Where is that innovation being driven? But you can also look at the flip side of it, which is how is the world responding to it? Like Europe is like a deer in headlights. They don't know what to do. In the absence of complete clarity, they're going to do nothing. And American companies are rolling up their sleeves, getting busy, taking every possible inch they can with that. And I think as a metaphor for how we think as a nation and what might be behind American exceptionalism, it's a pretty strong cultural element. I come back to the cultural element because, software is America's greatest advantage. Maybe at the dawn of World War II, we were the world's leader at mass production. We had just figured it out, and we used that to build the arsenal of democracy with lethal effect. We are no longer, but we are the world's best at software by a yawning margin. So much so that we kind of underestimate how good we are at it. The number 2 in the world is Israel, and they can only build canoes. They can't build aircraft carriers. Like every Israeli company at some point has to sell their business. That is not about IQ. Think about the fact that there are 0 Chinese or Indian enterprise software companies. That is crazy. So if it was IQ, you would have an even distribution of these companies proportionate to population. It's culture. That culture only exists in a scaled way in the US. And as much as we might look at Silicon Valley and think it's Indian or from immigrants, it's from Iowa. All of us in Silicon Valley are children of Bob Noyce. And the Midwestern positive sum, we play fair, high trust interactions that are required to build a company at scale. You don't have that trust in these other cultures. You only have it here. And everything that you see this in AI, you see it with how we adopt technologies. I'm just, I could not be more bullish about the fundamentals of what America works, even in the face of, the tactical clouds that are here or there. I think that obscures the reality of what's really magical and what's happening.
There we go. See, he knew. No sympathy clap. I'll just take us home and say, as we talk about just how much optimism there is and how much greatness, I'll end with, I look at folks like Joe that are dedicating their life to continue to lay the lattice between different communities so that the exceptional human being that is the American is able to continue to contribute and continue to scale. So I'll end with a huge thanks to Joe and the team here. And thank you, everybody.